And ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, today is an enlightening show. Today is a powerful show. Today is an empowering show. Um, by the way, this is yours truly, attorney Michael Cord, aka Michael X, aka the angriest black man in America. And when I say the angriest black man in America, I'm actually taking a line from the great James Baldwin, who, to paraphrase him, said to be black and conscious in America is to be in a constant state of rage. And with today's show, that rage is more intense than usual. And by the way, when I say the angriest black man in America, I mean a constructive rage, not a destructive rage. And for me, a constructive rage is one in which you are upset, you are enraged, you are angry, but you are focused in your approach. You're clear in your approach, and you are enlightened in your approach. I want to read to you before I get into the essence of today's show. I want to read to you part of an article that I wrote in the Philadelphia Tribune. In fact, I wrote it for the last 2, maybe 3 years. And what I try to do in that article is to explain to you why today, more than most days, I'm exceptionally upset and exceptionally angry. So let me direct you to an article in the Philadelphia Tribune. By the way, I write weekly columns in the Philadelphia Tribune. There's one column called Freedom's Journal, and thanks to our producer slash engineer extraordinaire, Roland, you see up on the screen. So when I talk to you about articles in the Philadelphia Tribune, my articles, just go to phillytrib.com as it shows on the screen, type in CORD, COARD, and type in whatever topic we're talking about. And this week, that topic happens to be Celia. That's Celia. And I wrote this article recently. In fact, it was in the June 21st edition of the Philadelphia Tribune. I also wrote an article a year before. Today, fortunately, you won't be hearing from me primarily. You'll hear from people who not only know more intellectually about the topic than I do, but people who are closer to the topic than I am. These are people who are related by blood to Celia, people who are descendants of Celia. Let me just read a few excerpts, and then I'm going to talk about our guest, and then we're going to hear from our guest. But again, go to phillytrib.com, type in CORD, COARD, and type in Celia, TCELIA. And the article is entitled, quote, "After repeated rapes, enslaved woman kills slave master in self-defense, but gets death penalty." That's in the June 21st edition of the Philadelphia Tribune. Let me read again to you the title, the headline of the article. "After repeated rapes, enslaved woman kills quote unquote slave master in self-defense, but gets death penalty." Now, many of you know that I am a criminal defense attorney, and I often share with you some of my exploits as a criminal defense attorney. I talk to you about some of the murder cases I handle, and I tell you how the law works. Well, when it comes to self-defense, that's what the public calls it. But the legal term is justification. In other words, it says, hey, I did that thing that you accused me of. I punched that guy. I stabbed that guy. I shot that guy. I killed that guy. But I did it because I was justified. And how are you justified in punching or stabbing or shooting or killing someone? You're justified if you're doing it in self-defense or defense of others. So if you're at home in your bed with your family and somebody kicks down the door or breaks out the window and comes to attack you and your spouse while you're in bed, but you have a lawfully purchased gun under your mattress and you pull that gun out and you shoot the intruder, that's justification. You are justified. Why? Because you were defending yourself or you were defending others. That makes sense. So you would think that if this enslaved woman, Celia, was being raped and had been raped repeatedly and consistently on a regular basis, if at one point she decided to fight back and kill her violent rapist, well, wouldn't that be justification? And wouldn't you not be arrested? And even if you were arrested, you just put on a defense, tell the jury what happened, and you win. Well, that didn't happen. So let me just read to you parts of it, and then we'll get to our guest in about 8 or 9 minutes. Remember, the article I wrote was June 21, so the article starts like this. This Sunday, June 23, at 10 o'clock p.m., it will be exactly 169 years ago to the very minute that 19-year-old Celia in 1855 displayed incredible courage by successfully defending herself against another of many brutal rapes. Let me read a couple more lines. For 5 years in a row, beginning in 1850, as soon as 60-year-old Missouri, quote unquote, slaveholder Robert Newsom at an Audrain County auction purchased Celia, who at the time was only 14, he began raping her. In fact, the first time was inside his horse-drawn covered wagon while leaving the auction and heading back to his Callaway County plantation. And as you notice toward the end of reading that, my voice dropped and I got kind of somber and seemed depressed, and that's not an act, that's all true. Because I did get quiet because I'm thinking about it, and I did get somber because I'm saddened by it, and I did become depressed because I am upset about it. A 14-year-old girl could be my niece, could be my granddaughter, bought like a piece of property, bought like a chair or a table or a desk, and not just purchased as an inanimate object, but then do whatever you want to that chair. You want to bang it against the wall? Do that. Do whatever you want to that desk. You want to bang a hammer against it? Do that. Buy a 14-year-old girl, whatever you want to do with her. You want to rape her, you want to brutalize her, you want to sodomize her, whatever you want to do, she's property. And the fact that this went on from the time she was age 14 in 1850 for 5 consecutive years, probably every day, every other day, she had to tolerate that. She had to endure that. She had to deal with that. Well, damn it, after 5 years in 1855, now at the age of 19, she was big enough and strong enough to resist. And resist she did by killing this monster. Now, no human being celebrates the death of any other human being. You acknowledge it. You might even be pleased by it because it's necessary, but you're not really going to celebrate it. So I'm not necessarily celebrating the death of Robert Newsom. Stop, Mike. Stop. I'm lying. I mean, I got a script where, I'm supposed to say that you don't really celebrate the death of another human being, but God damn it, yes, you do. If there's a monster raping babies, that monster has to be destroyed. And I'm celebrating that death. So I'm celebrating the death of Robert Newsom, but I'm not celebrating because I'm depressed by what happened after 19-year-old Celia did what she had to do in order to stop the brutal rapes. Well, it's fortunate for us that we have the descendants of Celia, which is some powerful stuff. I mean, we have a woman who, from what she's going to share with you, is going to let you know that her connection to Celia, she's a second generation great granddaughter. And then we have a gentleman who's a third great grandson. And we have a woman who's a fourth generation great granddaughter. These are blood relatives of Celia. And not only going to tell you the bad news about what happened to her, they're going to tell you the great news about what they're trying to do, to avenge Celia. And by avenging Celia, they mean telling her story. They mean making it part of history. They mean putting it in the face of America so we know what's going on. You want to hear from a woman named Pamela Westbrooks-Hodges. That's Pamela Westbrooks-Hodges. You want to hear from an attorney by the name of Casondra Turner. You want to hear from a gentleman by the name of Alan Turner. These are people who are related to Celia. And they're going to tell you, as I pointed out, the horrors that would happen to her. But I guess most important today in 2024 is what they're doing to avenge her. So we hope that you get your pens out, and we hope you get your pads out or your phones and record this stuff, because we're going to give you some instructions. We're going to give you some guides. We're going to give you some marching orders so that you will know what's going on. But most important, you will know what to do. Time now is 3:42. In about 3 minutes, at exactly 3:45, we're going to start to bring our guest up. And I'm going to rely on the guests for two reasons. The most important reason is that they're experts. I did some research on this stuff. I read about this stuff. I studied about this stuff. But this is only what I've been able to get during the time I've studied and researched. But you have people, relatives of Celia, who have done much more in-depth research and gone to the scene and talked to other family members. And they're scholars in the field. They're experts in the field. They know it all in regard to Celia. And as I said, they're going to talk about this tragic story of the brutality, of the assaults, of the rapes, of the trial. Then they're going to tell you what their plan is as part of a group that's called Justice for Celia Coalition. So as I say, get your pens out and get your pads out, because this is going to be some powerful stuff. In addition, remember what I shared with you about my article in the Philadelphia Tribune. Once again, go to phillytrib.com. That's phillytrib.com. Type in CORD, C-O-A-R-D. That's C-O-A-R-D. And then type in Celia, C-E-L-I-A. And that'll provide some important information. But the most important part is to watch and listen today. In about 2 minutes at exactly 3:45, I'm going to begin to introduce our guests. I'm going to tell you who they are. I'm going to tell you what they do. I'm going to tell you how to reach them. I'm going to tell you how to reach the organization that they put together, the Justice for Celia Coalition. And we're going to probe them. We're going to find out more about them. I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction regarding their bio, but they'll fill in the blanks and tell you more. We're also going to talk about this coalition. What is it, and what are the goals of this coalition? In addition, we're going to find out the roles that each of these guests play in this coalition. And one of the key questions I'm going to ask them today, as I did when they were guests on my radio courtroom show. Remember, now you're watching TV Courtroom here at phillycam.org. But in addition to TV Courtroom, I also host a show called Radio Courtroom. And you guessed it, it's on the radio at WURDradio.com. That's WURDradio.com. And you can also check it out on the radio itself at WURD 96.1 FM. That's WURD 96.1 FM. And again, our producer / engineer extraordinaire, has that up on the screen. So when I had them on my radio courtroom show, we talked about a number of issues, and I thought I had what I call some good questions. But the best question I posed to them is, why is this relevant? This thing happened 169 years ago. Why should people care? Why should people be concerned? Why should people be interested? Well, they should care and they should be concerned and they should be interested, but I'm not going to tell you why. Our guests are going to tell you why. So as I'm talking about them, you will see and hear them, and you'll be enlightened about what they have to say. We know that we have Pamela Westbrooks-Hodges. We know that we have Alan Turner, and very shortly we'll be having Casondra Turner, Esquire, to talk to us about the Justice for Celia Coalition. And I meant what I said earlier about having your pens out and your pads out or your phones out to record this, because this is some important stuff. And I don't want you just to be upset about it or enlightened about it or interested about it. That's all good. Be upset, be enlightened, be interested, but also be active. Do something that's critically important. So without further ado, I introduce to some of you and reintroduce to many of you, because if you checked us out on Radio Courtroom, you know these great activists and the great work they're doing. They're part of an organization called the Justice for Celia Coalition. They include, among others, Pamela Westbrook-Hodges. They include attorney Casondra Turner. They include Mr./Reverend Alan Turner. And let me just say a little bit about at least two of them, and hopefully we'll be able to get the attorney, the preeminent and prominent attorney, on to join us. As I said, the organization is called Justice for Celia Coalition. And Pamela Westbrook-Hodges is the coalition leader. She's a relative of Celia. She's going to tell you what that bloodline is. She's a native of St. Louis, Missouri, and is a newly retired general partner from Edward Jones Investments and a member of the Missouri Board of Education. I like the fact that she is a member of the Missouri Board of Education because, as she puts it, she passionately advocates for developmental opportunities for all Missouri children. That's important. We're going to tie that into what people can do in regard to seeking justice for Celia. We also have Reverend Alan Turner, who's a native of my hometown right here in Philadelphia, a corporate account executive at Staples, a minister at Cross Culture Church in Stonecraft, Georgia, and is a blood relative of Celia. And as I said, and I promise y'all, we will hear from the three of them. Let's start out with Pamela Westbrook-Hodges, and then we're going to talk a little bit with Reverend Alan Turner, and we're going to ask some great questions and get some even greater answers. Pamela, let's start with you by first asking, how are you today?
Blessed. Thank you for asking.
Good answer. In fact, great answer. I did a little intro about you, but as I said to the audience on my radio courtroom show, now we're doing the TV courtroom show. When I have guests on like you, I want to brag about you. I want you to brag about yourselves. I don't want people to think that you Googled some stuff last night and then you come on TV today as if you're a scholar. Well, no, you've been working this for a long time. So starting with you, Pamela, and then we'll get to Reverend Turner. Talk a little bit about yourself, and then we'll follow up with some additional questions.
Attorney Court, thank you so much for the opportunity. We're honored to be here. Well, I hate to talk about myself, but I suppose I have to. I'm a servant. I consider myself a servant leader. I built a career as a nerdy auditor and rose through the ranks and was blessed to become a general partner, co-leading our internal audit division at Edward Jones. Recently retired to lean into my public service life and to make sure that we're giving Celia the energy that she needs to get justice for her once and for all. My Celia story is interesting because my husband, 15 years ago, did some video production work for Celia supporters and was given a copy of the infamous Celia portrait by artist Solomon Thurman. And so Celia's been in my home for 15 years. And I only learned last year in April of 2023 that she is actually my ancestor. And most recently, through genealogy research, we've hired genealogists there, thinking she is my second great grandmother, and that my father's paternal grandfather, true paternal grandfather, I'm sorry, my father's true father, my paternal grandfather, was actually a son of Celia's daughter. So it's a journey for me. It's fascinating again because that portrait was in my home all that time and I had no idea that we were related. We were just sharing her story of exploitation and making sure that people knew this critical mid-Missouri history. I had no idea I was sharing my own family history.
I have to tell you, although I'm sure it wasn't scripted, I love the fact that you have the Celia glow and the energy all around you. I mean, I don't know if you set it up like that, but I wish I could do the very same thing because I could actually feel her energy and her glow around you visually as you were talking. We really appreciate you breaking it down the way you did. And Brother Turner, what do you prefer to be called? Mr. Turner, Reverend Turner, Brother Allen, what do you prefer?
Just call me Alan, please.
Alan will work. Thank you very much. You deserve it. I wanted to give it to you. Alan, talk a little bit more about yourself and your connection to Celia.
Well, thanks again for having us on your program. We certainly enjoyed being on your program on the radio recently. And I do want to say that this really started with me years ago, back in the 1990s, when my father, the late Reverend Alan Turner, actually went to Fulton, Missouri. And he interviewed, first of all, he did a lot of research there in their library system, but he also interviewed a few individuals there in the Fulton, Missouri area regarding the events surrounding Celia and her execution. And he actually was planning on writing a book about it because he gathered a lot of details. But as I mentioned earlier, he passed away. So some of his material we have kept within our family. But once the connection took place, where we began to meet with Casondra, and I won't take everything away from her or Pam, but once Casondra and Pamela connected, and we really started, putting our heads together with other family relatives to really pursue justice for Celia and looking at trying to honor her in a more dignified way. That's when I really became involved, became a lot more enthused about the situation and really saw a way that I could contribute towards it. So that is what I'm doing now. And thanks again.
My pleasure. Thank you. And we have the great counselor, attorney, Casondra Turner. Casondra, talk a little bit about yourself. And then after you do that, I want to ask you about the trial itself. And get to it and talk about what happened. But first, a little bit about you and your background. Do we have Casondra muted? That might be on our end. Okay, we can hear you. Great.
Okay,
go ahead.
thank you. So I am Casondra Turner. I am the daughter of Alan Turner, who just spoke. I am an attorney in Atlanta, but I'm also a mom with 2 little boys and a wife, and a Celia descendant, one of the 4th great granddaughters of Celia.
When I first started this interview with Pamela, she said she really didn't like to talk about herself or brag about herself. I see that's in the genes of all of you. You bragging about your great work, but you just cut to the chase, and I appreciate that. That's great radio stuff and great TV stuff. So I really appreciate you all doing that. Cassandra, we're going to come back to you in regard to the trial, what happened, what didn't happen, and what an exoneration is, what a pardon is, what a post-conviction filing is. We'll get to all that. But let's jump back to Pamela. Pamela, let's assume nobody knows who Celia is. Nobody knows the story. Spend 3, 4, 5 minutes filling in the blanks.
Happy to. So Celia was a 19th century young woman who was purchased by a widower and farmer named Robert Newsom. All this happened in Middle Missouri. She was purchased in Audrain County.
In fact, Pamela, I'm glad you used the word purchase, because every time I think about a human being being purchased, bought and sold, that just sends chills through my body. So I'm so glad that you used the word purchase, and I hope people appreciate the power of that. Please continue.
Yeah, this is 1850 Missouri, which was a slave state. And he purchased her. She was 14 years old. Again, he was a widower. And his expressed purpose for purchasing her was for sexual reasons. And so she was brought back to his farmstead in Callaway County, specifically there in the city called Fulton. And she endured this unwanted sexual relationship for about 5 years. In 1855, she had, by this time, she's got 2 children. We know that she attests that one was definitively his, and that attestation is in court records. But she's got the two small daughters that are like 1 and 3, and she's pregnant for a 3rd time. She's fallen in love with a slave named George, and the 2 of them just don't want this unwanted sexual relationship anymore for obvious reasons. And so she makes it clear that she doesn't want this relationship, and don't come to my cabin tonight. I'm sick. I'm pregnant. Robert Newsom pretty much ignores her pleas. Celia had also gone to Robert Newsom's daughters, pleading for their help, and they were either unwilling or unable to help get their father to leave Celia alone. So Robert Newsom comes to her cabin one summer night in June 1855 and refuses to leave. Attempts to have intercourse with her, and she hits him over the head, killing him. So as the story goes, she admits to hitting him over the head and burning his body in her fireplace. The next day, she enlisted the help of Robert Newsom's grandson, without him realizing it, to remove Robert Newsom's ashes from her fireplace. I know we shared this story before, and Casondra did a beautiful job going into those details, but there's a big preponderance of folks who don't believe that Celia actually did it, that she probably wasn't capable of, physically capable of killing someone that forcefully by hitting them over the head, and, given her condition. So again, there's a lot of folks who don't believe that she really did it, and that in fact she was covering for someone else, perhaps covering for her enslaved lover named George.
This is a perfect segue, because we have 2 beautiful sisters on the show, you, Pamela, and Casondra. And I want to reach out to Alan, hoping that he's like me, one of these angry Black men. And you just mentioned, Pamela, about, and I've never heard that before, that George, the man, might have done it. I can see me as a George. And I'm wondering if, Alan, if you could be a George. Before we actually get into that, early in your introduction, you talked about the execution of Celia. I'm going to get to that later to talk about how she died and the sentence and all that stuff. But talk about yourself as a man with a daughter, with a wife, with nieces. why, and this is a question I asked you during the radio show, how come you're not bitter and angry and seeking justice in the form of blood? How come you're not a George if George might have done what he might have done? Talk to us as a man who might not be as rational and deliberate because of his anger.
Well, I'll say that if I was there at that time and alive, back when this event occurred, I would have probably, and let's say if Celia had asked me or wanted me to cover for her, I would have definitely done that. And done whatever was required. But now we are in a different time. And so we're looking at, as I mentioned on the radio show, with this foundation that's been created, the Celia Newsom Legacy Foundation that's been created.
Talk a bit about that foundation. Please continue. Talk a little more about the foundation.
Well, we're really looking at, as was mentioned earlier, looking at trying to really bring justice to Celia and get a pardon for her from the governor of the state of Missouri, and also receive commendation and approval from various senators, Congress, people in Congress, representatives, all of that. So because we're trying to gain their approval, I have to look at the goal that we're trying to achieve as a foundation. And yes, I mean, I'm still upset and angry about what took place, but I realized that in order to achieve our goal, I have to embrace those that are of the Newsom family and work and communicate with them, work alongside them and communicate with them in this process so that we can achieve our goal for Celia and really the entire, all of her descendants, really, not just Celia, but all of her descendants. And so it's when I look at it from that perspective, it's an easier thing to do to work in cooperation with those individuals that are descendants of the Newsom family. Because some of them are working along with us, but there's some obviously that are not. But like I said, we're really looking at the bigger picture and the goals that we're trying to achieve, and we're trying to do it rather expeditiously as well.
Okay, sir. Well, I'll be the angriest Black man in America. You'll be the most pragmatic Black man in America. So well done. You touched on a number of things. You mentioned the execution. Someone else mentioned the whole trial. And we're going to rely on the attorney, Casondra Turner, Esquire. Talk to us about how this case even got into court, because it seems that nobody denies that she was purchased as a child. Nobody denies that she was sexually assaulted repeatedly. Nobody denies that she was impregnated by the sexual assaulter. So if this is going on and Celia defends herself, why was she even arrested? Why did it go into court? What happened during the trial? How did we get to the point now of seeking a pardon because it should have never been an arrest? Walk us through the legal process.
So certainly, looking at this today, it's really hard to imagine that these things could have happened to her. These things would never happen to her today. Even for women who are victims of domestic violence today, there's certain provisions in the law that protect them that would never let them get convicted of murder in such a situation. And of course, when someone is actually approaching you to do you bodily harm, you have the right to act in self-defense. And so certainly today, this would never have happened. But back in 1855, when this happened, Celia was a slave. So she had no rights. She had no right to self-defense. She was purely, by law, the property of Robert Newsom. So therefore, he could do literally whatever he wanted to do with her without consequence. And so, in fact, one of the reasons she admitted to doing this was because they threatened to take her children away if she didn't tell them what happened. And she knew that if she got caught, she would be hung. She knew that immediately because that's what she says when she's interviewed about this in jail. So the trial occurs. There's an all-white male jury, 12 members. Some of them are slave owners. And she gets appointed a defense attorney who I believe also may have been a slave owner. But he does his best. I think he tries to argue the self-defense argument. He tries to bring up the fact that she was raped repeatedly, that she bore him at least one child. But the judge doesn't let most of this stuff come in. The judge doesn't let the evidence about the repeated rapes come in. I don't even think they let her testify in the court about her having a child. And so the court also rules that they can't even introduce this self-defense argument. They're not going to instruct the jury on it, because what happens at a trial is that at the end of the conclusion of the evidence, which in this case, it was very one-sided in favor of Robert Newsom. Even at the end, both sides can tell the judge what they want to tell the jury about the state of the law. So her attorney did ask that the jury be instructed about the right to use self-defense when someone is facing an attempt to rape them. But the judge ruled that wouldn't come in. They weren't going to instruct on that, and they did not. And so she was very quickly convicted of murder. At some point, she does give birth to this child that she was pregnant with, but the records say that the baby was stillborn. She escapes from jail for some time. And it's even believed that she may have been housed by Robert Newsom's children during that time, because they actually liked her, according to the records that are available. And then she's returned to jail. The Supreme Court of Missouri considers the appeal that her lawyer submitted. They deny the appeal, and she is very quickly executed in December of 1855.
Talk a little about the time frame. You say quickly. So from the time she was arrested into the execution, about how much time expired?
About 6 months from the time she killed Robert Newsom on June 23rd, 1855, and then she was hung following a trial and an appeal on December 21st, 1855. So less than 6 months occurred from the time the incident happened to the time she was hung.
You talk about a rush to judgment. That's exactly what that was. Before I talk to you about the pardon and what the ultimate goals are, I understand that the defense attorney, it appears, did a pretty good job, or at least tried to. Is that your understanding?
I think he did try. And that's one of the things the book talks about. I'm pretty sure he was a slave owner too, which made it interesting. But he actually presented the arguments that one would present if they were really trying to advocate for her. So I think he tried. And I think he also is believed to be one of the people that helped her escape from jail, because I think people were really sympathetic to her situation. But also keep in mind, this is 1855. This is, I think, like 10 years before slavery is abolished. So it's a very tense time concerning slavery. Slave owners, most of them are like very, very against slaves having any rights. Certainly no rights to self-defense, because it would totally undo the system of slavery if they had the right to assert self-defense. So the time period is also really telling about, and I think there were also other cases going on around the country that also dealt with slaves doing things and whether or not they had the right to do it. And so it's a really critical time period in American history as well, just 10 years before slavery is ultimately outlawed.
And before we wrap this up, it's so funny because each time any one of you open your mouth, I'm saying to myself, hey, we got to end this thing at 4:15. And I'm like, no, at 4:17. Then I said, no, at 4:20. I don't know if you all know, but you're going to take the whole show today, because every time you talk, I am so impressed, and I'm sure the audience is. So the other topic, I was going to deal with a political issue here in Philadelphia. We just got to move that to the next show, because today we're dedicating all our time, our remaining 20 on this. And Counselor, I want you to talk about this whole post-conviction thing after nearly 170 years. I mean, how is that even possible? But before we do that, let's go to Pamela. Pamela, what are you all trying to do? I mean, we hear this horrible situation. We hear this horrible story. We hear about this foundation, this coalition, but what are you trying to do? What's the coalition trying to do? What's the foundation trying to do?
Well, great question. So the coalition is the forerunner to the formal foundation. But simply put, we've got a 5-point plan to honor and vindicate Celia. And what's notable about the Justice for Celia Coalition is that it brings together previous disparate and separate justice activities for Celia. And so now descendants are working with the great folks in Fulton, are working with legendary art historians, history professors who teach Celia in Middle Missouri at Westminster College and William Woods University. So there's a music artist who's written a song about Celia. So all of these Celia champions, if you will, who were previously working separately are now working together, and it's really amplifying our impact. And it allowed us to really dream big and say, what do we want for Celia? And so the 5-point plan is big, but it's simple. It's securing the post-conviction relief, and Casondra will tell you more about post-conviction relief and the forms that it can take. It's placing Celia museum exhibits both in St. Louis at the Missouri History Museum and also at the Kingdom of Callaway Museum in Fulton. It's also erecting a Celia monument in Fulton. Celia's daughter, Jenny, the one who came here to St. Louis, who we all descend from, she's literally buried in historic Greenwood Cemetery, about 3 minutes from my house, right where I am here in St. Louis. And many of her children and their children are there. So we want a monument to Celia descendants in historic Greenwood Cemetery. So those are so you've got post-conviction relief, you've got museum exhibits, you've got monuments. We again establishing the Celia Newsom Legacy Foundation as a part of that plan. The last part of the plan, which we're very, very proud of, is passing legislation in Missouri that would require her story is taught in grades 6 through 12 in an age appropriate way. If you pick up any social studies or history curriculum in our schools here in Missouri, Celia is not mentioned. She's taught at the collegiate level, but she's not taught to our children, which is a really big missed opportunity. So that particular bill, which we filed and we'll have to refile it, is actually extending what we're calling humanity education here in Missouri beyond the Holocaust. Let's talk about other examples of dehumanization that occurred right here on Missouri soil. So collectively, those 5 components make up our 5-point plan. And once the foundation is stood up, then it will be the operational vehicle that we'll use to continue moving this plan forward. And then we'll layer in additional activities, heritage programming, tours of the Newsom farmstead where Celia was enslaved, etc. So that's our vision. That's our plan.
That 5-point plan is right on point, and I'm so glad you broke it down like that to the listening audience. I'm going to ask a few more questions to each of you, but first I'm going to jump to Al Turner. But prior to doing that, I want to go back to Attorney Casondra Turner because I didn't get a chance to properly introduce her. By the way, those of you who are tuning into today's TV Courtroom show, you're watching and listening to Pamela Westbrooks-Hodges. You're listening to and watching Mr. Alan Turner and also Attorney Casondra Turner. By the way, Casondra practices law at a law firm in Atlanta, representing financial institutions in civil litigation. She has a diverse legal background, having worked in the private and public sector on immigration law, on criminal law, and on civil rights law. By the way, she's doing pro bono work in connection with post-conviction rights concerning Celia. Having said that, let's quickly jump to Brother Alan Turner. And I'm going to ask him a question that I asked during the radio courtroom show. And I was so impressed with his profound response. And that question, once again, is why should we care? This thing is 169 years ago. How is it relevant? Why should we care? Alan, what's your response?
It's actually relevant today, even though it's 169 years later after the event, because the control, the manipulation, and sometimes abuse of African American women has transitioned from slave plantations of the past to work environments of today. And those in authority, usually they're white males, they tend to manipulate, sexually abuse, either physically or verbally, African American women and other women of color who aspire to be promoted into positions of authority.
Yes.
And this also occurs sometimes when African American women need funding to start or continue their businesses as well.
Yes. Yes. You know, I love the way each you break it down and make it real. And that's exactly what you just did and explained to us why it's still relevant. We have about 13 minutes left in the show. I'm going to ask a follow-up question to Casondra. Then I'm going to give each of you about 3 minutes apiece for your closing argument, because this is a courtroom, TV courtroom, but courtroom nonetheless. Casondra, break it down to us. How does post-conviction relief work in a case like this? I've handled some cases here in Pennsylvania, but they're 2, 3, 4 years old. We're talking about 169 years ago. Walk us through the process.
I will do my best because it's actually not that straightforward. And because I practice in Georgia, I'm also not as familiar with Missouri law. So I've really had to study up and try to reach out to other people to figure out the best way to get this done. So the original plan and still the current plan is to seek a pardon from the governor of Missouri, which would pardon her conviction. It wouldn't necessarily undo the conviction or reverse it, but it would find that that in essence, she shouldn't be subject to the consequences of that conviction today. Because of, in our case, the law has completely changed. It was a completely unjust conviction, even if legally it was correct at the time. We recognize today that it was horrific. So we shouldn't let it stand. We shouldn't penalize her anymore and have her in the records as a murderer when in fact she was defending herself from sexual assault. So we are proceeding with the pardon. As I mentioned earlier, her lawyer did appeal to the highest court in the state, the Missouri Supreme Court, back in 1855. So that process, the appeal process, has been exhausted. And in order to seek a pardon in Missouri, we do have to exhaust the court remedies. And so we also reached out to the current prosecutor in Callaway County, Missouri, which is where this occurred. And he has also told us that he doesn't think he can file a motion to set aside her conviction, which is also an option in Missouri for people who've been convicted. But he doesn't think he can do it because the law at the time was followed, and he doesn't have any evidence, to otherwise say that there was something erroneous here. So he actually said he's going to also support our pardon, though, and he's going to write us a letter of support, encouraging the governor to grant a pardon. And along with our pardon request, we're going to gather letters from as many support groups as we can, politicians, and just show the wide support across the state of Missouri that is behind this request to pardon Celia. Part of that is that the governor is leaving at the end of this year. And so we're down to like 5 months to get this done because we're not sure if we'll be able to get this done next year with the next potential, whoever the next governor will be. So we are really down to the crunch line here, and we want to get this pardon request submitted. We want to show that we've exhausted our remedies. We want to have him find that this conviction is just unjust, and we shouldn't allow it to be a consequence anymore for Celia, because the descendants of Celia are affected by this, and women across the United States are affected by these kind of lingering effects of slavery and discrimination, and higher ups just not recognizing the abuse that women have suffered in this country over the last several centuries.
You're obviously a Georgia attorney. You claim that you're not an expert in Missouri law, but you sound like an expert to me. We certainly appreciate that. We're going to give each of you about 2.5 to 3 minutes for your closing argument. what you want the listening and viewing audience to leave with. We don't want them to just be enlightened. We don't want them to be concerned or just angry or just moved. We want them to do something, to be activists in their approach. So I'd like you all to do a 2.5 to 3 minute closing argument. I'm going to start with Pamela Westbrook-Hodges, and I'm going to go to Mr. Alan Turner and wrap things up with the attorney extraordinaire. So Pamela, what's your closing argument? And included in that closing argument, how can people help? Is there a phone number? If there's a website, is there an email address? The clock starts now, Pamela.
Great. So I'll start with closing thoughts, and I'll end with how people can get involved and do something really great. So I want to impress upon everyone that Celia remains relevant today because she showed remarkable courage by standing up to her abuser. And her courage in the face of certain death continues to inspire everyone. There's not a person we share this story with who isn't inspired by the stance that she took, because she certainly knew when she took this stance, it would likely result in her death, but she did it anyway. So one, Celia continues to inspire everyone. But two, Celia's story is just a reminder that human trafficking is not new. It's not new. Celia's plight is the plight of nearly every enslaved African woman brought to this country, kidnapped from Africa and brought to this country. And the proof of that mass exploitation by their enslavers literally lies in the European DNA that every African American possesses. Most of us are 75% African and 25% European because of that historic rape of our ancestors. So as we speak, nearly 170 years after Celia's death, our country is still struggling with the woman's right to have a say in what happens to her body. We're still talking about that. I can't think of one law that that zooms in on the rights a male has to his body. So we're still struggling with this. And Black women have been harmed the most by this bigotry. So the last thing I would just say to everyone is to remember that, tell Celia's story, and remember that we exist because of what our forebears endured, what they sacrificed. So we encourage you all to honor your forebears by researching who they were and bringing light to their stories and repeating their names. Casondra said it beautifully before on Saturday in the radio show. When you do that research, you'd be amazed at just the beauty that you can find in the relationships and the connections you can forge. And you can find relatives that you share so much in common with, but you didn't even know them before. And I don't know if I shared this before, but my dad always wanted to be an attorney. I was this close to going the attorney route. I ended up becoming an auditor, but that left brain energy is alive in all of Celia's descendants, and it's so apparent. I'll get to my orders, and I will share how folks can get involved and just really do something historic here. But you can share Celia's story, or you can give your treasure. If you want to give your treasure, that will help us fund the monuments, the museum exhibits, fund the heritage, the future heritage tours. You can donate to the Celia Newsom Legacy Foundation by going online to www.stlgives.org. Click on Give Today in the top right-hand corner, and then click on Make a Donation. You'll see a list of different funds. And if you type Celia, you can get directly to the Celia Newsom Legacy Foundation Fund. And it's very easy to make a donation online. If you prefer to write a check, you can do so. Your check should be made payable to the Celia Newsom Legacy Foundation, and that should be mailed to 301 Court Street, P.O. Box 313, and that's in Fulton, Missouri, 65251.
We certainly appreciate that. We're going to now jump to Alan Turner for his 2-minute closing argument.
Well, I forgot to mention earlier that before my father went to Fulton, Missouri, and did his research and interviewed some individuals there, a few years prior to that, my daughters told myself and my wife that they actually remembered reading and learning about Celia through some textbooks in school. I don't remember if it was high school, if it was college. I'm not, that part's not coming to me, but the fact that they even brought it up, and then later on, you know, my father's actually researching more details about it. It's really caused me to have more of an interest in the story, because I was not even aware about Celia until the 1990s. But what I will say is that everyone can, with everyone, all of us, you know, really coming with our descendants coming from Africa, and all of what our people have gone through to get to where we are right now, we pretty much owe it to them to try to connect with other relatives that are still alive, that are descendants, you know, of our ancestors. And that's something that I'll let Casondra talk about, that I thought Pamela was going to mention it, but she didn't. So I'll let Casondra talk about it a little bit if she wants to, about how she and Pamela connected.
That's right.
But I think that not only do we have to just kind of pay homage to our ancestors by connecting with, you know, other descendants, and we can find them, you know, some of them anyway, by going through ancestry.com and other sources. But I would say that one way that each of us can, everyone I should say, can be involved in this is by contributing financially, you know, putting your money where your mouth is or where your heart is.
Yes.
Do that because the money will be spent towards the event or towards the vindication of Celia. It won't be going to anything else. And the other thing is, every December there is an event for Celia held in Fulton, Missouri, and it takes place on December 21st, because that is the day that Celia was hung. And it takes place amongst those individuals in Fulton, Missouri that are familiar with Celia, and then from people that come from different parts of the world, really, to pay their respects and to honor her. So that is something else that you can do, you know, if you feel so led to, and I would strongly encourage it. So thanks again for the opportunity.
Attorney Cord, I would just like to add that it is our most fervent wish that this particular Celia candlelight vigil on the 169th anniversary of her death is that we're able to announce her pardon, that we're able to announce the launch of the Celia Newsom Legacy Foundation, that we are able to unveil her museum exhibit. What you see behind me is a rough draft print of what that exhibit will look like. And we're working right now to get it completed. And so it will be unveiled at that candlelight vigil once it's actually framed and completed. But there's a lot that we hope to wrap into that event. And I'm hopeful we can convince Cousin Reverend here to be our keynote.
That sounds great. We've run out of time, but I got to squeeze in at least 56 seconds to the attorney before we wrap this up. So your 56 seconds begins now.
Oh, I think they've said it all. But just to add on, as we continue to formalize, I'm sure there'll be more events and different ways that people can support. If they're Missouri residents, it's certainly be helpful for them to write to different legislators as we roll our bill out again next year. And so just please continue to follow us online for new developments and support us. But also, of course, get in touch with your own ancestry, your own relatives. And just very briefly, it is funny because that's exactly how Pam and I connected. I had taken my DNA test years ago. But then just last year, as one of my cousins was trying to get us back together to do things for Celia, I went back to DNA and I was able to find all of my relatives through Celia by like kind of parsing through my ancestors. I was able to find the ones specifically through Celia. And Pam was the only one I found still in St. Louis, Missouri, where my great grandmother is from. And so I reached out to her. I was like, hey, you know, you're a descendant of Celia, right? And she was like, no, I don't think I am.
I got to tell you, I just joined your family. I'm so impressed with each of you. We've run out of time. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in December.
We
Thank
can't
you.
wait. Thank you, Attorney Court.
Thank you very
My
much.
pleasure. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day. That wraps up today's wonderful show.